Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. These can be issues to do with tourism, information technology, religion, education, human capital, and agriculture. We discuss all of them here in order to find how they impact on our economy. One time when the president of the country, His Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa, was writing in one of his weekly columns, he said, government has set in motion comprehensive plans to promote startups in the agricultural sector and drive rural industrialization through value addition of agricultural produce. So it is rural industrialization that we want to discuss today. My name is John Masugu. Today, our guest is none other than Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, who is a development strategist. He's going to be defining what rural industrialization is and many other facets connected with that concept. Professor, welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you so much, yes. Mr. Masuku.
Nowadays, there's a lot of talk about rural industrialization. What is it? Is it a separate thing from urban growth and so forth? Is it a standalone? We would want you to define what rural industrialization is.
Well, what I would recommend, the ideal situation is rural industrialization cannot be looked at separately from overall industrialization of a nation. So rural industrialization does not happen in isolation from overall structural transformation of overall industrializing the nation. So when governments design rural industrialization programs, it's in mind to do one important thing that did not happen during the colonial part of our economic development. Connecting large numbers of rural communities who were never connected to manufacturing processes. And it's important maybe now to define what industrialization is, because there's a tendency to confuse it with manufacturing, building factories, shops, business centers, growth centers. Now, industrialization is not a mechanical process. Industrialization is a whole transformation in which a whole nation manages its production processes. So the whole nation, the whole set of systems that make a nation transform. It's not just the manufacturing. Even the way families function change. The educational system functions. The legal systems change. So that the way cities continue to grow because of manufacturing also change. So when we say industrialization, it means a whole way in which society is reorganizing around increasing urban industrialization. That is basically three main processes.
Now, while we are there, where are we right now with regards to industrialization? As you go to different rural areas, what you might see are a number of service stations. Those do thrive very easily, some grinding mill and so forth. What else are we seeing? What else do we have as we talk about rural industrialization? Where are we starting from?
So before we rush to detail, because I think that's the problem we have, not just in Zimbabwe, but the whole continent. Africa has 55 countries. Not one of the 55 is a fully industrialized, high-income country. Not one. 0 out of 55. It's not an accident. Bad governance is part of the problem, but it's not the main problem. The main problem is every African economy is not structured to mass uplift the majority of its population into manufacturing processes and secondary industries and cities that are viable. So the majority of African towns, cities are not manufacturing. Back to Zimbabwe, Bulawayo and Harare, our largest cities, they're not manufacturing cities, even those. They've de-industrialized. Every single African country is in a middle income trap, meaning you've got a dual economy which stops processes of mass uplifting people. So what happens is the cities are growing, no manufacturing. The cities are growing, there's no economic viability in the cities. So in the end, whether you got good or bad governance is one thing, but those cities will never have citizens or ratepayers who can afford a city council capable of putting all the water systems, the roads. No single African country, including South Africa, our best industrialized economy, deep in the middle income trap. So when we talk about service stations, factories being built in rural areas, to me, those are symptoms of what you're trying to do to uplift the rural areas. Rural industrialization starts with the realization that within a rural setting, you have agricultural and non-agricultural activities. They have to be linked from day one. Okay, so you must produce raw material, must manufacture them, and must consume them. Now that is how an industrial society functions. So as you must produce raw materials, the difference between now and where you're trying to go is you must produce products by people, even no matter how small farmers they are, they know where their maize is going to produce what product, not just to GMB. Okay, so you go to an industrialized country, they don't just produce maize. They'll say there's 15 different manufactured products out of maize. Even starch alone, there's 6 different types of starch. For pharmaceuticals, for confectionery, for so forth and so forth. So a farmer already knows when I produce my maize, is to go into that manufacturing process where it's starch for pharmaceuticals. So the right varieties for that is this and that.
That's Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, who is a development strategist defining what industrialization is, and also that the mindset is the starting point, that we should think of industrialization beyond technology, beyond machines only. So we'll get into more detail about rural industrialization with Professor Mandivamba Rukuni in the second segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we're discussing rural industrialization with our guest, Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, who is a development strategist. Professor, you have just defined what rural industrialization is, and you have given examples to indicate that we haven't gone that far even as the continent of Africa, yet we are still striving to get there. Maybe at this point, let's look at the stages that are quite pertinent in order to achieve rural industrialization.
First important thing is to look at the existing forms of production in the rural areas. It doesn't matter how artisanal they are or basic, that's where you start. They call that proto-industrialization, meaning manufacturing without factories. And China is the latest one. They industrialized in 2 generations, isn't it? Mm-hmm. How did they do it? They started with a rural industrialization.
And as you say that, Professor, we have plenty of those in our own rural areas.
But you know what, in Africa, we call that informal sector, whereby we even put up a separate ministry for those things because they don't exist as industrialization. The Asians figured, no, that's where you start. You start with what you have, you upgrade. So, without exception, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, today China, Vietnam, they upgrade their proto-industries through a formal policy which says it's part and parcel of one industrial process. We are connecting one economy, one industrialization process, not an informal here, something else there. So the Chinese, who took forever, longer than Africa actually, to figure out. You remember they were in the wilderness from the late 40s to the early 80s, fumbling around just like we are doing in Africa, until they then figured out in 1980 how to link agriculture, rural transformation to manufacturing. They did it in 2 generations.
Is this then what we are attempting to do by introducing devolution and making sure that each province has or utilizes what it has and is also supported even from central government?
Zimbabwe, just like I say all the other African countries, is trying to do the right thing, but the structure is still wrong. Because what happens with devolution is you are assuming that you are going to decongest governmental processes and have the budget to then cause the industrialization processes, agriculture, rural transformation backwards. In reality, devolution will succeed faster once we go back and uplift the agriculture and rural transformation faster. Why? Because your rural district councils are broke. They rely on money from government. There's no economic activity financing those rural councils, is there? So they are also busy trying to extract resources from the same people whom we are trying to uplift. So you have competition between rural councils in the same communities you are trying to uplift. What should be happening, and this is what I'm suggesting is the process, is to look at the infrastructure that has been built with our trunk roads and so on. Electricity, that is the old colonial infrastructure, fine. But the colonial infrastructure was designed to take things out of the country and back in imports. What's missing now is focus on the rural infrastructure which connects all villages to small towns, growth centers, cities. In other words, you're converting every little village and town, Marondera, Chinoi, Mvuma, there must be manufacturing. In fact, no town should be upgraded at all if there is not manufacturing. Don't even call it a town. Town means you are primarily manufacturing something. So what the Chinese did, you manufacture everything within 25 to 50 kilometer zone. When you produce your maize, produce your products, the product industries start manufacturing. Village and township manufacturing is the starting point. So that, and it can be done within one generation. Devolution linked to rural industrialization, you're looking at one thing. The villages are manufacturing. The Maronderas and the Rusapes start manufacturing. That's your signal that your rural industrialization agenda is now working.
While you are there, Professor, okay, very briefly, what would be your critical analysis of all the blueprints that we've had which have led us thus far?
All the blueprints lack one important thing. It's about managing structural transformation. It's not about building factories, doing a project here and so on. Managing structural transformation, meaning you are rejigging and reorganizing the entire society. You're not leaving anyone behind.
Including the
That's
mind. The mind.
Especially the mind.
Yes.
So, if you even what our president is saying when he says leaving no one behind, leaving no place behind, that is to be translated into deep technical process. What does that mean? It actually means, if the blueprints are to be rewritten, that the rural economy now starts the manufacturing processes, starting with the food industry. Then you go into the light industries, leatherware, textile, even the herbal products are now manufactured in villages. That's what the Chinese did. After less than 10 years, 1980 to 1986, they sorted the food problem. In a few years later, they started village township manufacturing. Remember, in the early 90s, you were eating noodles here already. Those were not manufactured in Beijing. They were being manufactured in the village in China. But they eventually made their way here because you are industrializing from the village to the township to the small towns, the major cities. So that the major cities are now concentrating on top level manufacturing. Not manufacturing Maputi in Harare, Putse Maputi. No, it should be top level products. Because Maputi, bread, all those things should be manufactured way in the village, in the small towns.
That's Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, our guest today, and our topic is rural industrialization. We've heard a lot from the professor about how we should change our mindset so that we are progressive towards utilizing what we have in different rural areas, and also to adjust some of the blueprints that we already have in order to be full-scale industrialized. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing rural industrialization with Professor Madivamba Rukuni, a development strategist. Professor, you've given us lots of examples, you've given us your own ideas of how we can revamp some of the policies that we have in order to make an improvement. In fact, earlier on, I cited His Excellency the President when he was writing in one of his weekly columns, but he went on to say, there is a yawning gap in our agricultural ecosystem, a gap we have to plug. How can we plug those gaps, especially by changing the mindset and also coming up with appropriate startups?
Yeah. So let's put it this way. Of course, we have to start with what we have, but I have to go back to just emphasize that just as the structure of our economies are not suited for rapid industrialization, so are the governmental systems. Because this silo approach to government, we got this from the colonial masters. We just apply it, but it's not suitable for a country which is still trying to develop. It's good for an economy which is already fully industrialized. 95% of your people are in urban areas. Because if you go to our rural areas where the majority of people are, that society is not structured in silos, health, agriculture. But no. It's just society. So the structures of government are still for the wrong type of economy. So it has been all government approach. It has almost pretend like you don't have silo ministries. They all come together and want to do the same thing. Lift these people up into a manufacturing society. Give them skills and education systems which help them to reconfigure the way they organize and work. So I'm just going there so that we don't lose sight of that. But also, secondly, follow an industrial upgrading approach where you start with what you have and grow. But conscious, the government needs an all-government industrialization strategy, not a Ministry of Industry strategy. Meaning, upgrading rural society into industrial processes starts with how they are processing Dovi now, how they are processing different products, leather products. You upgrade that to proto, as I said. And if you see what has happened in the newly industrializing nations in Asia, slowly, as the back and forward linkages work, small machines start coming in. So something that was being done artisanally, now a small machine comes in. That's light industry. That's where light industry should come from. It's the small machines which actually then create the demand for real heavy industry. Because heavy industry means you're now having machines that produce machines. In other words, heavy machines that produce light industry machines. That's where your steel industry is coming in, energy and so on. Just getting Zisco to grow is not really the answer. What the answer is building lots of light industries which create demand for steel.
Yeah. And then the attraction of all these things, so that while we have these products, we then don't have to be attracted by what is coming from outside the country.
Let me tell you something. We are 90% of the products we're importing today, we don't need to import them.
But people are always talking about quality and durability when they import those products.
Quality is an issue, but look, I'm 70 years old now, so you can also allow me just to be blunt on these things. Quality, value is not an external quality, you know that. It's not an external characteristic. Value and quality is given by people. Okay, I put a car in front of you there, you give it value. It doesn't have its own value. Because you take the same car to Himalayas mountains, to a mountain goat header, it may not have any value. A lot of what we think is value is cultural. We value a lot of fast foods, junk foods. Is that quality? Well, it's quality for you and me and our grandchildren, because we taught them to value certain types of cultures where it's glitzy, it's flashy, but you are eating junk. You could as well, your grandmother cooks better food.
Yes.
But you are prepared to pay more for it. So a lot of what we believe is economic value is actually cultural value that has been sold to the rest of us.
That's the mindset that we were talking about, Professor. But in the last few minutes that are left, address this current scenario where lots of people are building mansions in the rural areas. I haven't heard of any building many factories. How these can then be integrated to the growth of the industrialization that you're talking about.
Yeah, so what's happening with a lot of growth building and a lot of nice houses being built at growth centers and so on, but at the same time, you don't have functional city council or manufacturing. Well, that's typically what's happening throughout Africa, I can tell you. All you have to do is build a nice road
to that place,
and people will start building those nice houses around it. This is typical of individuals and individual businesses making money, but the economy not growing. So when you must uplift a society through industrialization awareness, when you must lift people like that, they all participate in industrial processes and their lives change around that. So that even though they may not even build a mansion, but that 2-3 bedroom house that is built is in a proper city with proper budgets, because they're an economic town. Towns have to be economically viable, not rely on funds that are trickled down from government
and from diaspora.
So that's the difference between an industrializing society to one where businesses are just growing. Where businesses are just growing, people will have lots of money to build nice houses, but where there are no functional services.
That's Professor Mandivamba Rukuni, a development strategist who was our guest today. And today we've been talking about rural industrialization. A lot of tips and advice there from Professor Rukuni, and also advice about changing the mindset so that we move together in this process of industrializing our rural areas. What remains is to thank Professor Mandivamba Rukuni. If you'd like to get in touch with us here on this program, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. You can also engage us about some of the topics that we discuss here on the social media platforms that are again showing on your screen. If you have missed some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can view them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So, on behalf of Professor Mandivamba Rukuni and the production crew, this is John Masugu wishing you happy viewing.